Today, we are proudly honored by having a very special guest, one of our own, Clare Burgess. Clare is a qualified landscape artist. She has taught at UCT and the Cape Peninsula University of Technology for the past 20 years. In fact, this very morning, she was busy working ahead, trying to finish some university stuff. So we are happy that she was able to make it on time. She is developing an e-learning course on resilient plant design, theory and practice. Clare is a chairperson of the Tree Keepers Cape Town Association, which raises awareness of ecology and environmental benefits of trees in urban areas and caring for this urban forest. Her firm, CBLA, which she will tell us a little bit about during the talk, hopefully, has won many awards, including recently won a Merit Award of Excellence from the Institute Landscape Architect of South Africa. And Clare was appointed a fellow of the Institute in recognition of her work in promoting landscape architect around the country. She is also a former trustee of the Cape Town Heritage Trust and shares her interest in cultural landscape by giving public lectures on the UNESCO World Heritage sites that she always visits whenever she has time to do so. So, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce this amazing speaker. Clare, without any waste of time, over to you. But before you take it away, to everybody else, if you have any questions about how to get involved in some of Clare's work, maybe look at this e-learning opportunities that she might be having, please leave us a comment on the Q&A. Just ask us that question and we'll make sure that we get Clare to give us some guidance and answers at the end of the talk. From my side, John, I will see you guys on the other side of the call. Clare, over to you, my sweetie.
Good morning, everyone. So first of all, let me say a big thank you to Kirstenbosch and John and Belinda for sorting out a venue for me to do this, because my office has load shedding this morning. Anyway, so I'm very glad to be here, and it's wonderful to be back presenting another talk to this forum. Since I know that there are people from many different backgrounds who are interested in this series, I hope that my presentation today will appeal to the sort of wider audience and show how landscape architects think about their surroundings and the environment. One thing that I've learned from my 40 years of practice in the field of landscape design is that all successful projects start with good observation skills. So this leads to good understanding and great ideas, which in turn hopefully leads to successful implementation of the vision that has been created. The design process needs to be open and inclusive and to seek out opportunities and embrace them. This was certainly the case that presented itself to me at the end of last year. Out of the blue, I was asked by a friend if I would like to join him on a special trip up to the Skeleton Coast National Park in Namibia. It involved a lot of planning and detailed coordination, all of which had already been done. So without any thought, I just said yes, fantastic. Despite a few obstacles presenting themselves in the week prior to our departure, we set off from Cape Town on Christmas Eve, 2021. I just want to check, can everyone see this clearly? Yeah, I hope so. Please think of this presentation as a helicopter view of a small portion of this sparsely populated country located on the west coast of Africa. I'll be hovering over a number of places and subjects that contribute to this unique desert landscape, and touching on how and why landscape architects need to understand the big picture in order to design in a sustainable and creative way. The next 40 minutes will hopefully be an entertaining form of armchair travel rather than an academic treatise. The talk is illustrated with lots of visuals, and the subtitle, Big Skies, Small Creatures and Strange Plants, is designed to provide the viewer with a sense of incredible contrasts and scale that the Namibian landscape supports. By the way, the most of these photos were taken by me with my Huawei cell phone. I did take my Canon camera with me, but I have decided to use most of the pictures from the cell phone because they're in the right format and easier to actually upload, etc. But some of the really good photos, particularly, for instance, this one of the pangolin at the bottom right, was taken by Roy Turlian, an award-winning photographer and the person who invited me along on this trip. Sorry, I'm just going to stop for a second. John, I just want to ask, are they seeing that on their screen? Okay. Okay. Great. So the subtitle, Big Skies, Small Creatures and Strange Plants, comes from the impressions that I recalled from 2 trips to Namibia in the 1980s. The Welwitschia plant was a must-see to any landscape designer worth their salt, and I saw them growing in the Namib Desert back then. The most lasting impression was the huge expanse of sky and open landscape. And I have been keen to go back to experience that solitude and immense absorption that one feels in a landscape free of development and man-made objects. True nature, I call it. Previously, I had not had much interest in the smaller wildlife animals, and it was only recently that I heard about the plight of the rare and endangered pangolin. So I was keen to see if we could spot one of those as well. So the last presentation that I gave in this series was about Ethiopia and the impacts of climate change. And once again, I'll be touching on this growing concern of climate change and its impact on natural systems in my presentation. I'm no expert on this subject, but it really does seem that Africa, and particularly Southern Africa, with its biodiversity hotspots, have already started to see major changes in a relatively short time frame. The question, therefore, is not when, but how will the desert landscapes that make up so much of Southern Africa's west and central parts and include Namibia, South Africa, and Botswana, how will they adapt or die? But first, let me tell you where we plan to go and why I was so excited. The map shows our route within Namibia in pink, a pink line, with the overnight spots marked with a green dot. We literally drove from border to border and back the entire 1,600 kilometers length of Namibia twice. We started in Cape Town and our first stopover was on the Orange River. We then headed up through the Tierasberg Conservancy and Namib Rand Park area to the Walvis Bay. So I'm just going to use my cursor here. So this is the route that we took going up. To Swakopmund, where we joined an organized tour in Henties Bay here. That was the start of an 8-day tour of the Skeleton Coast National Park, which finished in Puros. So we continued, So we continued up the coast, going inland in places and out again to the coast and inland and out again, and then through the mountainous areas back down to Puros. Sorry, Puros is here, in the Kaokaland. From there, we did our own trip to Etosha and then back to Cape Town, approximately 6,000 kilometers in 16 days. The journey that had been planned started with an overnight stay across the Namibian border on the banks of the Orange River. And we were amazed to see how high the water was flowing in the valley. This was a week after the rains had finally come to the Karoo, and the runoff from the catchment area was flooding down the river at an unusually fast pace. We actually wondered, would our camp chalets that we booked be there when we arrived? The river was named the Orange River by Colonel Robert Gordon, commander of the United East India Company, or better known as the VOC, when he was at the garrison in Cape Town, and he did a trip to the interior in 1779. He named the river in honor of William V of Orange, who was King of Holland at the time. But I think that the name is still appropriate today, not because of its colonial past, but because the banks at sunset look a beautiful shade of deep orange due to the geology of the area. There are areas of volcanic lava and other igneous rocks, which were then overlain by layers of sedimentary red sandstone and shale. And these 4 photos give you a very good impression of the route up the river in flood and this wonderful orange color that bedecks the landscape. We stayed at Norit Sharma Resort, which is set in the middle of a highly productive table grape production area, which uses pumped water from the river to irrigate the fields close to the valley floor. The area is known as Ausenkar, and the need for labor to pick and pack grapes has led to a massive informal settlement expanding into the landscape nearby. Interestingly, the shacks that have been built are a combination of corrugated iron supplied by the government or the business people, and reed walls, which would have been the traditional koi material to build the shelter from. The area is a sea of poverty and litter, but there are some folk who have taken the initiative and are drying grapes in the sun to make a bit of extra money on the side. So the top photo shows an aerial view of this incredible green landscape set in the middle of this orange and brown desert space with the river running through it. And the top right shows the density of informal settlement that you can see in this area close to the fields. The views below are typical of what you see as you drive by on this road. As a landscape architect in Cape Town, I have worked on site development for informal and low-cost housing, and it was fascinating to see the informal way that this township has evolved along the erosion stream courses and the setting and the particular setting squeezed in between the river, the source of life, and the road, the source of wealth and a chance to escape poverty. Landscape architecture is a design profession which is defined as a combination of art and science, and it requires a thorough understanding of natural systems and the science of ecology, botany, horticulture, as well as man-made systems such as building and project management. But it also deals with cultural heritage of the people who live and work on the land. I've found that travel is one of the best ways to experience the incredible diversity of life on this planet. And my visit to Namibia at the end of last year certainly reinforced this in many delightful and strange ways. So I had not been expecting to see townships on the trip that we did. And it was very interesting to stop and actually observe how this particular township had evolved and what materials they were using. The luxury experienced at the Norit Sharma Lodge, where I took a much needed dip in the pool, surrounded by green lawns and abundant bird life, was in sharp contrast to the garden built by an enterprising gentleman on the edge of the township. That's the bottom right photograph. His choice of plants were limited as he did not have an endless supply of water for irrigation and probably didn't have even any running water in his house. But he still made the garden attractive and used strong architectural plants to create a sense of place and enjoyment. And interestingly, this is what the resorts and lodges all do as well. So here is a budding horticulturalist, and I hope one day he may become a landscape architect. We had originally hoped to cross into Namibia at the Sendelingsdrift ferry border post, but it was not operational due to the COVID restrictions, and so we had to come via Noordover. Watching the fast-flowing water rise along the C37 roadway, it was difficult to believe that the last time I'd visited this area and paddled down the Orange River, there was often so little water in the mainstream that we had to get out and pull our canoes. The locals commented that they had not seen the water so high for many years, and the contrast between the water and the surrounding rocky desert landscape was astounding. There were signs of life where plants were eking out an existence on the rocky slopes, but rain has not fallen in this area for a very long time. I found it interesting that the modern buildings which mark the entrance to the II Richtersveld Transfrontier Park, just past the Fish River Canyon, also utilized the reeds and latter poles to create shade and shelter along with carefully constructed river stone walls. You can see that in the top right photograph. As the day warmed up, we saw our first active group of baboons and observed how the family group were very protective of their young and totally habituated to the cars passing by on the busy dirt road, which is often used by massive trucks and other mining and farming equipment. We headed up out of the flooding river valley towards the C13 road to Rosh Pinar, Witsputz and Aus, where we planned to fill up with petrol and have lunch and cheesecake. We had heard about the good food and cold beers at the Bahnhof Hotel and hoped to celebrate a bit since it was Christmas Day. But unfortunately, we actually arrived too late and we were lucky to get served at all. It was at the garage that I spotted this mural and took a photograph to use as a rough map to plot our journey. I found it quite funny that the retrofitted security camera was located plumb in the middle of the Skeleton Coast National Park on this mural where we were heading. But it was actually made quite a lot of sense since the place that the camera was located in has absolutely no roads and nothing really to cover up. We continued to head up into the higher plateau area in the Tiersberg mountain range. And the photo on the right is taken whilst in motion and epitomizes the many kilometers of endless straight roads, all made out of sand or gravel, and generally also in very good condition. Sometimes there are fences along the roads, but often these have been taken down to facilitate a wider range for wild animals and game, and even for the cattle to graze when the rains come. Now that we are getting into the area known for its incredible red sand dunes, I think it is appropriate to define what a desert actually is. This definition by an Israeli botanist, Emmanuel Neumayer, resonates with me. It's a water-controlled ecosystem with infrequent, discrete, and largely unpredictable water inputs, in other words, rainfall. Or in simple words, a desert is a place where the rate of evaporation is greater than the precipitation. In Barry Lovegrove's recently updated book, and I'm just showing this, if you look at where my face is, you can see the book, The Living Deserts of South Africa, published in 2021, he states that climate change, more than any other threat, will have and already has had the greatest impact on Southern Africa's deserts. His book is all about how desert plants and animals adapt and cope with the rigors of desert life, and I was fascinated by the talk that he gave last year on this subject. So when I was given the opportunity to go and see it for myself, I certainly jumped at it. Namibia has the second oldest desert in the world and probably started to form about 34 million years ago, but it became a real desert landscape about 22 million years ago due to the expansion of the Antarctic ice sheet and a major drop in sea levels. The Namib Desert is a vast, arid region, and the name has Khoisan origins, meaning a desolate place. The icy cold Antarctic water of the Benguela Current, which flows northwards along the west coast of southern Africa, brings nutrients up from the ocean floor, and these get eaten by fish and in turn by seals and birds. The cold air brought up by the current interacts with the hot air coming off the land and creates the low clouds and fog that provide life-giving moisture to this area. Rainfall is very unpredictable and can be as little as 50 millimeters per annum. So that's just 1.5 centimeters, but it also goes up to 75 millimeters, especially towards the eastern areas in the uplands, and most of it falls in summer. There can also be very strong winds and intense levels of sunshine throughout the year. When I said I was going to Namibia, everyone said, won't you be too hot over Christmas? But actually, this is the best time of year to go, since the coastal belt is covered in fog in the mornings, and this cools everything down and means that the Namib is also classified as a cool desert. Throughout the year, moisture condenses out of the fog onto the plants and any stones or gravels that are about. And this ensures the survival of the ecosystems that make up this desert landscape: the plants, the insects, the reptiles, and the mammals. On the left, the top left slide, you can see the red sand dunes in the distance and some of the bushes which seem carefully placed at particular intervals in the landscape. Elsewhere, you can see how the mountain ranges are mainly rock, but in the niches, there are plants growing, and this gives a lot of sort of softening and texture to these areas. But mostly it's open gravel, open sand with amazing grasslands when it rains. As you can see, we were there and it hadn't rained apparently for nearly 7 years. This is the landscape that met us in the evening of our second day in Namibia as we headed to Ranch Koimasis in the Tiersberg Conservancy. This conservancy is a group of 4 owners which have come together to protect the area and ecologically manage it and make it accessible to tourists. The place where we have booked is a working cattle farm and teaches American-style cattle ranching techniques using specially bred desert horses. It lies off the D707 between Helmeringshaven and the coast where the red sand dunes begin. The rocks really were lit up both at sunset and in the morning, and this gives you a very good impression of how red everything feels and how hot it can get in summer. The following slides give you a bit of an idea of the place that we stayed in, which had many beautiful trees and which we experienced both at night and during the day. And I think that they had done a good job of trying to create an interesting venue or lodge. And we certainly were very comfortable there and had a Christmas meal. This landscape and its incredible sunrise show how excited I was about life at that time, since I seldom see the sunrise here in Cape Town. But I was up early every day and really enjoyed experiencing how the birds start to wake up and call, and really the beauty of this landscape. Another a bit later in the morning, as the sky turned from red to gold. And here are some views of the ranch area with cattle troughs, amazing rock boulders which shine sort of red in the sunlight, the huge big skies and big landscape that one experiences there, and the clouds that were coming over with the hint of rain. And also an area where we were able to park and then walk through these rocky outcrops and see in detail some of the incredible vegetation and rock art. Some final photographs of this area before I move on to talk about the allodendron. The few plants that live in this desert landscape have extraordinary strategies for survival. Since plants are at the bottom of the food chain, they have become a very useful subject to monitor and research in terms of understanding potential climate change impacts. This is because plants have to stay put and face whatever comes at them. So they must be very resilient and adaptable if they are going to survive. With this in mind, quiver trees, a type of aloe, were declared to be endangered by the International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources in 2010. This is mostly due to climate change and the increasing heat and decreasing rainfall in southern Namibia. The trees grow in generations, with each generation potentially reaching between 100 and 120 years old. The younger trees, however, need to get sufficient water for several consecutive years for them to be able to mature successfully. Excuse me. So with the long drought that has plagued the region, there has been little opportunity for young trees to reach maturity at all. Subsequently, as the older trees are dying out, and with the younger trees not growing optimally, their numbers have decreased. Research by Wendy Foden has been done to measure range shift in the quiver tree areas. And remember, the quiver tree has now had a new name. It's changed from Allodichotoma to Allodendron dichotomum. And it stretches in particular areas across southern Africa, from Namibia to South Africa into Namaqualand. In this slide, the white dots show the localities with forest mortality related to climate stress from drought and high temperatures throughout the world. The background map color shows potential environmental limits to vegetation and the primary production that it signifies. The red, orange, and pink zones show how drought and heat-driven forest mortality has been documented in relatively dry regions. And if you look on the map to the southern area of Africa, you can see two white dots. One is the Tierasberg and the other is in Kruger Park. So it shows that there has been increased mortality linked to drought and heat, and the impact has really been detrimental to the centuries-old aloes in Namibia. Interestingly, I had heard about the death of quiver trees back in 2010 when I was working with Conservation International in Namaqualand. So I had actually wanted to come and see the evidence of this for a long time. And so it was very serendipitous that I managed to come on this trip. This slide shows research also done by Wendy Foden between 2005 and 2007. It monitors range shift, or the areas where specific trees can grow successfully, and uses the Allodendron dichotomum as the example. In this slide, red indicates mortality proportion in individual populations. And it's noted that the higher latitudes and the higher elevation populations show markedly lower mortality because the suitable range of the species shifts southward with climate change. So further south, there's a lot of mortality, but further higher up in Africa and in the higher elevated areas, it's a little bit better. The name Khoi Massis is derived from the Khoisan inhabitants of the area and means a place where people meet. Maybe they congregated here in the Tierasberg Mountains because of the abundance of quiver trees. Sadly, all the trees seem to be dying. But interestingly, the locals are not convinced it's due to climate change and feel it may be part of a drought cycle die-off. We did a short day drive to the mountain range across this plain to visit the dying quiver tree forest. I walked up the steep rocky slope which faced east and was astounded by the lack of soil and the rough terrain that these trees can establish themselves in. The Khoisan used to make quivers for their arrows out of the hollow branches of this aloe tree. The tree was named by Simon van der Stel in 1685 after he had heard the story about the quivers. Quiver trees are endemic to the Namakuru in South Africa and in southern Namibia, here along the Great Escarpment on the west of the area. They have successfully adapted to the fluctuating annual rainfall in these areas over eons and commonly occur on the slopes or tops of hills and scattered across rocky plains. The photographs here are all mine and show the range of dead, dying, and living trees that one can see up there. The tree's stem and branches consist of a spongy fiber that can store large quantities of water over long periods of time. Their leaves have a smooth and waxy surface that prevents moisture from evaporating. A vertical stem protects the tree from direct sunlight during the hottest hours of the day, and the yellowish bark and thin layer of white powder on the branches reflect most of the sunlight away from the tree. There. The rough and scaly bark is thought to be an additional and remarkable internal cooling adaptation to cope with the harsh surroundings. Here you can see me in the bottom left with the vehicle way down there in the valley that I'd walked up from. I felt very proud of myself. Our departure from Koyamasis was greeted with dark clouds to the east, suggesting rain was on its way to this parched grazing area. We were also treated to a wonderful sighting of a small herd of running Kemsbok, and a short while later we stopped to observe 3 jackal at the fence, who were intently staring at something on the opposite side of the D707 road, an actual public road. Their behavior led our eyes to an amazing leopard kill by the side of the road. How lucky was that? I mean, it was, we thought it was a fantastic omen for the rest of the trip. You don't expect to see leopard at the side of the road. Unfortunately, I don't have any photos of it, but I can assure you it was an amazing sight. The road was very sandy, and we engaged 4x4 in some areas as we drove towards the Namib Rand Nature Reserve, along the C27, past Sestrum and Sossusvlei, to join the C19 heading north to Solitaire. I have tried to visit as many UNESCO World Heritage Sites as possible in my travels, and I can certainly say that the Namib Sand Sea is one of the most unique landscapes that are included in their version of the Natural Heritage Sites, or their category of Natural Heritage Sites. It is the only coastal desert in the world that includes extensive dune fields influenced by fog. Covering an area of over 3 million hectares and including an additional buffer zone of nearly 900,000 hectares, the site is composed of 2 dune systems, an ancient semi-consolidated one underneath and another overlain by younger active moving dunes. The desert dunes are formed by the transportation of material over thousands of kilometers from the surrounding land and seascapes. They have been carried by river, ocean current, and wind over eons. It features gravel plains, coastal flats, rocky hills, inselbergs within the sand sea that rise like islands in an ocean, and a coastal lagoon, as well as ephemeral rivers, resulting in a landscape of really exceptional beauty. Fog is the primary source of water in the site, accounting for a unique environment in which endemic invertebrates, reptiles, and mammals adapt to an ever-changing variety of microhabitats and ecological niches. Quite an astounding place. Our journey in this vast and wild open landscape continued at speed on the C14 road through the Namib Naukluft National Park to Swakopmund for a refuel and a last chance to buy some food stocks and snacks and water. As an introduction to the Skeleton Coast area north of Swakopmund, I have put together a few slides to give you a quick understanding of the landscape that our journey introduced us to. Henshey's Bay was the starting point of our organized commercial 4x4 trip into the Skeleton Coast National Park. We arrived at the height of the Namibian school holiday Christmas season, when the entire population of Windhoek descends on the Atlantic Ocean, and there was one hell of a party going on at Dunedin, a well-known drinking hole and our 2-star hotel. This was the only spot we could find to stay overnight, but at least I could take an opportunity to swim in their pool. The next morning, we met our tour leaders and the group at the Total Garage, and guess who was late? The Italians. Sadly, their contingent had been delayed at many points along their journey due to COVID, but they arrived just in time and also managed to even get to the bottle store before it closed. Get to the bottle store before we set off and just as it opened. It turned out to be a very large contingent of people, 13 vehicles, 5 staff, 23 adults, 4 children, and that makes 32 hungry mouths to feed. You can imagine the logistics of getting this trip together for the team leaders. You can imagine the logistics of getting this trip together for the team leaders, who were called Oki Junior and Oki Senior, father and son, and came from the Wild Skeleton Coast Adventure Tours and the Namib Desert Tracks. We headed up north, past the Cape Cross Seal Colony, mile 72, mile 108, and numerous other mile-named fishing spots to Terrace Bay. As a landscape architect, I observed the featureless landscape and the harsh climate and noted the shifting sands on the primary dunes, which have been badly eroded in places to create access to the beach from the C34 roadway. The road is constructed of gravel or salt for most of the way and is extremely well made, making driving fast and somewhat furious, with not much time to view the landscape or spot anything interesting. But you can't miss the fishing contingent with their long rods, which make their cars look like hemsbock, with the horns attached to the front bumper bull bar. There are a few locations with insensitively designed buildings and development, but one has to think that not much will survive this extreme climate with strong winds, salt-laden air, and virtually no infrastructure. This is the vehicles that we joined, the tour leaders. We stopped at a wayside resting place where one could buy salt crystals and other rocks, and were told a bit about the rocks that are mined here for crystals and the commercial salt pans that have been created to provide sea salt. Later on in the trip, we were given the opportunity to smash open rocks to reveal the amazing crystals inside and find amethyst, rose quartz, and many other agates and semi-precious gemstones. At Terrace Bay, we had our last fill-up for diesel, and the road becomes the D2302. They say that first impressions count. And so I was very unimpressed with the signage that told us we were in the Skeleton Coast National Park. The sign also told us to beware of lions, which we were very hopefully going to see. The animals have literally hundreds of kilometers of beach themselves and roam the dunes looking for vegetation and signs of life. Amazingly, we were to find that there is actually quite a bit of life here in this desolate landscape. From this geological map, it can be seen very clearly that the landscape of Namibia is comprised of a thin strip of coastal landscape, demarcated here in bright green, which rises to about 250 meters and includes all of the Skeleton Coast National Park. To the east of that, the land rises up to the Rocky Plateau at 500 to 1,000 meters, and as one moves inland, the majority of the landscape is over 1,200 meters. This inland area receives more rain than the coasts and rivers, and it runs from here down to the sea, but often stops before the water reaches the coast and continues only as underground dry riverbeds. In good rainy seasons, the rivers break through the sand dunes and exit into the Atlantic Ocean. We've crossed a few dry riverbeds which only flow after heavy rains, with wonderful Nama names such as the Omaruru, the Ugab, the Huab, and the Khoikhab. And we also passed the huge salt pans at Ambrose Bay. Eventually, we arrived at the last outpost of entry to the Skeleton Coast National Park, where the park rangers live and work from. And this was Moe Bay. You can get through this area with a special permit, and all tours require a designated team leader who is handpicked by one of the concessionaires, by the one and only concessionaire who has the right to access this part of the park for ecotourism. So our first night camping under the stars on this trip was spent 50 meters from the shoreline, just north of Moe Bay, in a sheltered little cove. The tour operator was brilliant. He was well organized, friendly, provided us with great food and information, and inspired confidence and a sense of camaraderie. I felt safe and happy to be in such good hands. The two slides here were taken by Roy Turlian and gives you a sense of the awesome scale of the landscape where no artificial lights exist and humans are limited in numbers and constrained by rules and regulations to let nature do its own thing. On the left, the Milky Way, and on the right, I put this in to show you the scale of the sand dunes that we were driving past. The springbok at the bottom and the sky just peeking out at the top of this picture. Dune driving is not for the faint-hearted. I loved it. And from the first day when our guides introduced us to the rules and techniques needed to survive in this soft sand, we really enjoyed ourselves. With our slightly low-slung Ford Ranger, which was extremely heavy with extra cans of diesel and many liters of water to survive the 8 days in the middle of the desert, we managed to peak the dune ridge on the first dune driving skills test. I would like to publicly thank Roy Turlian for his incredible fortitude and humor, which he displayed as the only driver of our vehicle during this entire trip. I think all the other mana in their Toyota Land Cruisers were pretty impressed, and I certainly appreciated the way that Roy managed these tough conditions and took care of his vehicle, a Ford amongst many other Toyotas. We only got stuck once and had to be towed out of a deep, soft sand patch, and we did not have one flat tire or any serious incidents, although other vehicles actually did. So here you can see the sand. It's very creamy white, turns a little bit red, but it's not like the red sand dunes south of Walvis Bay. It's definitely the creamy yellow sand. And when the skies are gray, it's also very gray. There's also large areas of gravel, stony desert, but most of the moving sand dunes are what is making up the Skeleton Coast National Park. The Skeleton Coast is named after the many skeletons that litter its landscape. From shipwrecks, old mining equipment, debris washed up from the ocean, to natural elements such as whales, their bones, and other animals that frequent this land. They all end up being buried in the moving sands and are uncovered from time to time by the wind. There are many fascinating stories of the shipwrecks and the rescue of people stranded on this coast, but sadly, many of them do not have a happy ending. And unfortunately, the slideshow is too short for me to tell you about them, but it was quite fascinating. We all had radios on our vehicles, and so the tour leader, young Oki, or Oki Fur, since he always drove at the front, spent much of our time driving, telling us the story of the Dunedin Star, a ship that was wrecked off the coast and where some survivors did manage to get out. So fishing is one of the activities that is allowed with a permit, and our tour guides were determined to get us some fish for dinner on New Year's Eve. Sadly, the weather did not play ball. The wind humped And I mean, literally, you could feel your legs being scoured by the sand and the salt. We only managed to eat fresh fish the next day after another attempt at catching the bounty of the sea. Many of the tiddlers caught by the guests on the trip had to be returned to the sea, but I took some time from this period to go for my swim in the sea. I like to swim wherever I visit on holiday all around the world. And so I definitely didn't want to miss the opportunity of swimming off the coast of the Skeleton Coast National Park. However, it was very rough. And so I hope it lasts out. And so I spent quite a bit of time in a little lagoon at the back of the beach area. You can also see along the coast, you see many seals and beautiful flamingos flying. And so we spent that time when everyone else was fishing, driving along the coast and looking at things for ourselves. There's also some wonderful rocky beaches with incredible pebbles. It looks like the scratch patch as you walk down to the beach. Hello.
Hi everyone, I think we're having some technical issues. Please bear with us. Are we back on? We can see you. Hi, John and Claire.
Yes, we are back on.
The battery went flat, so just reloading.
Sorry about that. And Claire, if you can start just from your last point,
Yeah.
and I'll be able to edit it out nicely on the recording. Sorry, everybody.
Turn it back. Back.
Thanks, John.
Okay, sorry about that. The battery went flat. Okay, so this area is an artist's paradise, and I found myself taking gazillions of photos of the different textures, colors, forms, and sheer beauty that surrounded me. I intend painting a number of oils from this collection and hope to have an exhibition soon. So I hope everyone is invited to that and we can all come and have a look at what the area looks like from an artist's point of view. Some of the camps we stayed at were located close to the shoreline and others were in the lee of sheltering sand dunes. All were well managed and comfortable, and we only experienced one day of windblown sand. There was one fearful moment when we realized that we didn't know where we were in the sea of sand, since the fog had descended and the wind was blowing and the sand obscured everything. But sooner or later, the sun comes out, and through that, you get to see where to drive again. The best thing to do is to stop and wait, and then once the fog has moved on or the sand has stopped blowing, you can find your way. But it was quite scary at times. The campsites that you can see here, some of them are at the bottom of dunes, so they acted as a form of shelter. You can see the tent that we stayed in. A lot of people had rooftop tents, but we actually camped in, we were one of only 2 people who camped on the ground. And every evening we would all set up our chairs around a wonderful campfire where the cook, who was the wife of Oki Jr., did her meals with her 2 assistants and fed us absolutely brilliantly. There was a good stock of alcohol that had been brought along, and the vehicles definitely got lighter towards the end of the trip, not only from drinking the water, which we also had to use for our showers, but also from consuming a lot of the alcohol. In the park, we stayed overnight at some wonderful camps, Agate Terrace, Boslace Bay, and then moved into the Hartman Valley and ended up at the Puros village camp on our last night, which is outside of the park. We saw some incredible survival stories of how animals have managed in this desert. And my favorite is the spider, who makes tunnels underground to escape the heat and carefully lays out tiny pebbles in a circle to identify its home and the entrance to its underground tunnel and stake its claim to this piece of desert landscape. The 2 photographs at the top left show firstly the tunnel with just 1 or 2 stones around it, little mound of sand where the soil has been brought out from under the earth, or the sand has been brought out. And then we found another little hole with a finished circle of stones. Apparently it's usually 7 or 8 stones, but in this case there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stones. So maybe this was a bigger than usual spider, I don't know. What was also amazing in this area was that over large expanses of the gravel, there are beds of lichen. And that lichen is obviously there due to the incredible ability the algae has to capture moisture from the fog. The 2 folks standing on the left-hand side photograph are standing in a field of lichen and that's Oki Senior, who rescued us when we got stuck, and his assistant, who was actually the second cook and bottle washer. So a trip to Namibia would not be worth mentioning without talking about the amazing plant, Velvety Mirabilis. I had been introduced to this, as I say, when I first went to Namibia, but I was also introduced to it and how it grew and everything by Ernst van Jaarsveld when I went to visit the Babylon's Tour and Gardens, where he has an amazing example of a Velvetia landscape with the correct sand and rocks and heated underground areas to grow the plants outdoors. Here you can see some of the female cones. There were also mainly plants with male cones, but some had the female cones, and it was growing in this incredible rocky landscape that you see on the right-hand side at the bottom. This is a plant that really is quite incredible. And I'm going to just read to you from Ernst van Jaarsveld's book about it. If I can just find the correct place. The flagship of the Namibian desert plant life is the Velvety Mirabilis. Although it is easily propagated from seed, once established, the plants cannot be transplanted. So to take this plant anywhere else in the world, you have to collect seed, which you require permission to do, since it is a protected species. And I know that Ernst has gone on many trips to try and collect that. So when the Austrian doctor Friedrich Velvety stumbled on an untidy plant that resembled nothing he had ever seen before, he knew at once that he had discovered the weirdest plant on earth. His find, made near Cabo Negro in Angola on September the 3rd, 1859, aroused immediate interest among scientists, including Charles Darwin, whose description of the Velvetia as a platypus of the plant kingdom is amusingly apt. It's a non-flowering gymnosperm, and although the Velvetia has been categorized among the angiosperms, it is more advanced than members of this division, displaying features intermediate between gymnosperms and angiosperms. For instance, the reproductive structures of the male plant bear large anthers, similar to those in the flowers of angiosperms, whereas the productive structures of the female plant are more like those of gymnosperms. So it's a sort of a crossover plant. But the strangest of all the plant's characteristics can be seen during fertilization. Instead of the male sperm making its way into the ovary of the female plant to unite with the eggs move up to the male sperm through a special tube which grows from pollen grains adhering to a sticky substance on the female comb. How amazing is that? Velvetias are found only in the Namib Desert, where between 5,000 and 6,000 plants occur. Strangely, they do not display the more obvious adaptations to aridity, such as small wax-covered leaves. Instead, two broad leaves grow from the gnarled, stunted stem. And although it is still debatable whether Velvetias can absorb moisture from the frequent fogs in the Namib Desert, it is thought that the balance that high rates of water loss from their broad leaves by means of long lateral roots, which tap water trapped in underground rocky fissures and gravel deposits. In the extreme west, they are found only in washes and runoff areas. It is very rare to find a Velvetia in the Namib Desert that doesn't harbor some colorful bug which feeds on its sap. So they are also there for the insects, and some Velvetias have been dated to 2,000 years old. So that information, the last bit, comes from the Living Deserts of South Africa book by Barry Lovegrove. So I was very glad to go to this area, which was actually located near Palmwak, one of the camps that we stayed at, and be able to walk amongst Velvetias. So after the Skeleton Coast tour, we headed for Etosha to the Dolomite Camp, which is on the west side of Etosha, the very far west, and has only recently been opened to the general public. Before that, it was a private camp. So this was the last resort that we stayed at on our trip. It was beautifully designed, making stunning use of the elevated Dolomite Ridge to create views across the salt pans and plains of Western Etosha, and to create a visitor experience that was literally worth dying for. I loved being there, especially as I had my own little dip swimming pool attached to the very luxurious unit that I was living in. So during the heat of the day, you could jump into the pool and cool off. Local materials and minimum construction footprint showed commitment to sustainable architecture, and carefully built stone paths, terraces, and recreational facilities made this an absolutely magical place to be. The swimming pool on the bottom left had this incredible view out over the plains, and of course I took the opportunity of dipping in there on both of the nights we were there. Of course, Etosha is famous for its wildlife, but that would be another whole series of slides. So I'll just show you here some of the lions that we watched at one of the water holes. Elephant, lion, we even saw rhino were pretty amazingly abundant in this area, despite there not being much rain. But the bush was pretty lush. I think it's acacia bush there. But what I wanted to say is that at the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned that I was hoping to see the rare and endangered pangolin. And since it is mainly nocturnal, I booked a night drive in the hope of sighting it. But as we left Etosha on our last morning, the elusive pangolin had still not appeared. So imagine our surprise as we began our long drive back south, when bold as brass, a large pangolin literally crossed the road in front of us. That's my photo through the window of the bakkie of the pangolin, taken with my cell phone. You know, we were in shock. And then Roy managed to get some better close-up photos using his long lens, and that's one of his pictures at the bottom right. So it really did feel like Christmas, and my birthday all rolled into one. So I was very happy that that occurred. We headed then back through Keetmanshoop and stayed overnight there, where the rains that had been promised finally came, and there was an incredible thunderstorm, and headed back to Cape Town the following night. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope that you've enjoyed the talk.
Claire, we have most certainly enjoyed the talk. I think there's a little bit of a video filter. Maybe let me flip my camera around. It looks like I've taken the video filter from you. That displays some interesting lips there from my side. This was an absolutely amazing presentation. And I think, once again, you've taken us on a journey that we can't even describe. I think one of the main reasons you do these travels, Claire, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is because of all the hospitality that you get, all the lovely beverages and the lovely food, and it makes me want to be a landscape architect myself, because it seems like you enjoy all these travels just for this wonderful hospitality. Tell us more about the food. Do you find food, vastly different, especially in Namibia, from what we used to hear in South Africa?
Well, there was actually quite a lot of meat served, which I think, the game is wonderful up there. We had springbok steaks and stews. But, it's difficult to cook for 32 people in a campsite. So it was simple kos, mainly boerekos, but really very delicious and very well managed and fantastic. Yeah.
Wow.
And the luxury camp, we only stayed in in Etosha is a luxury camp where we ate in the restaurant. The other glamping site that we were at Palmwag, we actually self-catered.
Oh, lovely. No, that makes perfect sense. And I see everybody just joining us on the call saying, George specifically saying, thanks, Claire, fascinating, and a memory jogger. It joggers me of my own trips there, so he says absolutely loved it. Again, just everybody, Sam saying, Claire, this looks absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Mervyn saying a great talk, thank you. And I think what you've done for all of us, Claire, is just just reminded us, what traveling is all about. It's just just being out there in the outskirts and really enjoying nature. The one question that I have for you, though, is how do you use all these travels that you've got to come up with general landscape designs? How does this inspire you?
So basically, by observing what is happening in nature and in the built environment, this is the sort of I download that information mentally. And then when I come to actually design a site, I can call on those observations and see what is appropriate and maybe call those in and create ideas from those things. So for instance, that little spider that made that ring of stones around its entrance hole to its underground tunnel, that would be a lovely idea to take and put into a landscape at a lodge, for instance, where you could use that pattern or that concept as a way of keeping people cool, maybe having underground caves or whatever, and lining the edges with the stones laid out beautifully. So, you look for patterns and form and texture and colors, and you look at how you can replicate them or mimic them in design. So it's sometimes known as biomimicry, the mimicking of nature in good design. And that leads to sustainability because you're actually working with nature rather than against it.
Against nature. No, makes sense. And Claire, if maybe perhaps I can just ask just quick 2 follow-up questions. In terms of your data collection, obviously a lot of these travels that you do are quite inspirational. Also idea, thought-provoking. What is your system of collecting data and information, and how do you store such data to recall it for future projects?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm like everybody else. I collect data when I'm at home on the internet. When I was teaching at UCT, obviously one has access to incredible resources there. But I file all my pictures, my photographs, and try to keep them in an order that is accessible. But I think that the main thing is once you've experienced something, the knowledge is there. And so you don't need to necessarily have the detailed data. You can always find that later. But it's more about recognizing the value of seeing strange places, learning to adapt in those strange places, like the plants adapt, and going with the flow, actually enjoying what you see and hear and touch and feel, and applying that to your everyday life when you're back working.
Wow, I think that just sums up this amazing presentation perfectly. It's about going out and learning and allowing yourself to see different spaces and letting them kind of grow in you and not be afraid to interact with that with nature. No, absolutely fantastic. I mean, we could go on for the whole morning. We still have a couple of individuals on the call. Everybody just saying, thank you so much, Claire, for all the wonderful photos and the experience that you've shared with us on this platform. And, we also once again take this opportunity to thank all our sponsors for making this possible. RoomToGrow, Straight Nature, as well as Senbi, for just always making sure that, we do the best that we can to make sure that these presentations happen. I have one last question for you before I let you go. And in fact, it's one question connected in 2 parts. And the first one is, how do you pick the kind of next visit that you're going to do? Because you are, I don't want to even say fairly because of it's an understatement. You are well-traveled. You've seen so much. How do you plan your next travel? And associated to that, how do you link costs in terms of that? Do you does the cost come first, or do you think of a trip first and then think of the cost later?
So it's actually, I seldom say I really want to go to such and such a place. I look out for opportunity. And opportunity usually comes to me. So like this trip, I mean, I hadn't planned to go up to Namibia, but the opportunity arose. And normally I travel with a lady called Joanna Castle, who goes to sacred and exotic destinations. And she puts together the trips and says, do you want to come on them? And if I can afford it, then I travel with her. I think one of the tricks with traveling overseas is to not stay in fancy hotels. try and stay in sort of 3-star or, you know, guest houses and that sort of thing, because that's where the majority of your cost is. And if you're traveling in a group, it's relatively inexpensive because there's a bus that's been hired and you get around that way. But group travel is not for everybody. So you have to sort of weigh up whether you want to be with a group of people or not before you set off. But yeah, I often actually even take food with me on my travels so that one doesn't have to spend money on expensive meals. Splash out at a couple of restaurants, but you know, take snacks and things in your suitcase, biltong. Oops, no, not allowed to say that. But there are tin foods you can take and that sort of thing. And for me, it's seeing the places that counts. It's not the luxury that I'm staying in. So that's how I managed to make it work. And because I'm collecting information for my talks and for the landscape courses that I teach, some of this is able to be written off to tax because, you know, it's I'm doing the work as research for that particular purpose. Sometimes I get projects overseas. So for instance, in Ethiopia, I was on a project and I have had other projects in the UK as well that I've dealt with.
Sure, amazing. And it would be absolutely unfair for me to let you go without you telling us a little bit more about your online program that you've developed. You know, how long does it run? You know, can one start at any given time? And I'm putting you on the spot here because of you've really, you know, opened our mind, and I'm sure there's a lot on the call who want to perhaps maybe explore an opportunity of getting something, you know, which is a little bit more formal training.
Yeah. So the e-learning course that we've experimented so far is one that was put together by Sandy and Donovan Gilman, who have a training company. And Mareka Honek and myself were two of the experts who collaborated with them on the e-learning course, which was all about resilient planting design. It has been run a few times. And we're hoping that we can build on that and create more content and appeal to the landscape industry to take these sort of short courses and actually try and make some money out of it, although that hasn't happened yet, obviously. But I think that e-learning and digital presentations is unfortunately the way that everything is going. And so one has to stick with the times and try and get with it. And so that's what we're trying to do, is to hone in and be able to continue to share the knowledge that we've learned over the years with a wide audience, remembering that unfortunately, when you turn 65, you are no longer allowed to teach at UCT or at CPUT. So that's a sad state of affairs, but that's the reality. So I am hoping that going forward, we will make more of these e-learning courses. And maybe what we can do is we can let you guys know about them, and you could, you know, distribute that information if you would like to do that.
Awesome. No, I think you've summed it up again quite nicely. What we will do, Claire, we will collect all that information. Most certainly, you know, if you've got links, if you've got a pamphlet that you'd like to share with us, you know, your social media network, please share it with us, and we will most certainly take it and share it on our platforms as well as part of this amazing presentation, and then, you know, link it as part of a conversation moving up and leading up to the next Wednesday talk, which will be taking place on the 13th of July, right here online at 10:30. And, you know, talking about e-learning, this is a typical example of what an e-learning experience would be. You know, you taking us through this amazing content while we have some sort of material to kind of refer back to and do some exercises. So kudos to you and your team for putting this together. I think it's something really exciting to look forward to. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to take too much of your time. I want to take this opportunity once more for thanking everybody for making it to this talk. Let's thank our partners once again, our sponsors, RoomToGrow, Straight Nature, as well as Senbi for putting this together. A big shout out once more to Kathy for always going out of her way to making sure that we've got this amazing, fantastic speakers. And as just as an overview, just 1,000 apologies for any hiccups that might have happened during the presentation. But I think Clare was an absolute superstar, always calm and just making everything seem so seamless. So it's been an absolute pleasure working with you, Clare. And we look forward to the next Wednesday talk. And hopefully, when we invite you on this platform again, you'll be giving us vouchers to links to your e-learning training courses so that we can give away to everybody that will be joining us online. So in 15 seconds, any last words to you? From you?
Yeah,
yes.
I forgot to mention Tree Keepers, the group that I am chair of, and which I would like to promote, because this is the organization that we are involved with in terms of conserving trees in the urban forests. We work in Cape Town, but there are many other organizations around the world, and we've just heard that a new one is starting up in Somerset West. So please think about the trees in our cities and how much care and attention they need, and try and become an activist or an advocate for planting more trees and looking after the ones that we have.
Awesome. Tree keepers, everybody. I think it's a call to action to everybody that's on the call, that's still on the call, and there's quite a few of us. Our week is actually coming up. We will definitely be reaching out to you, Claire, just to find out how we can partner some more and how we can get involved, and perhaps maybe give a helping hand to making sure that we can look after this environment that we've got. From my side, everybody, it's been an absolute pleasure. Claire has taken us on a journey. We are on a journey of our own with all these challenges that we have about load shedding and all of that stuff. But despite all of that, you've really taken us on a journey and made us feel so special that we can actually, look forward to much more greater things. So from my side, until we meet again on this very same platform, it's adios and have a fantastic rest of the week and have a good weekend until we meet again in the next talk. Thank you, everybody. Have a fantastic day. Claire, thank you so much. Thank you for gracing us with your presence.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.